I'm just talking myself through it to make sure I do it.
Okay.
And I seem to have lost Veronica now, so I'm going to just tell her to come back.
Okay.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good. Hi, Lucy. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. I was just saying to Darragh, I think we've got a slightly smaller group this week, so we'll try and do a bit of a go round to have a chat first. But let's see how we do with numbers and things. I'm still not kind of on top of this whole Zoom keeping track of things. Hi, Veronica. How are you?
I'm good. Nap time hasn't happened today, so I'll be listening with my video off.
Perfect. Yeah, I wasn't sure if we'd see you. I thought you might be working today.
Yeah, well, we usually get a nap time, but I'm just looking at a 2-year-old now. It hasn't happened today. But I still wanted to listen.
Perfect.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be turning my screen off now. But
okay, cool. Thanks so much. Yeah, hopefully Veronica will have a chance to
is it just
it's just the 4 of us at the moment, waiting for a couple more people, but it's a smaller group this time as well. I was just saying to Darragh, the work you've been doing, Veronica, with the Nanny Solidarity Network and moving towards a new union for nannies and au pairs. So yeah, there might be, hopefully there'll be time to chat about that a bit as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, we're currently doing some funding applications, so hopefully that will kind of allow us to do things like bringing in an immigration caseworker and things like that, which is exciting.
And is that nannies who are working in the home, is it?
Yeah, so it's nannies and au pairs, and it's predominantly migrant nannies that we're helping, and we're looking at providing things like immigration support and sorry, I've got a singer next to me. Yeah, immigration support and things like English classes, because yeah, there's a bit of an overlap there with like not having access to employment law in the same way that someone with secure status would. So yeah.
The same issue here as well. Although I think they were kind of deemed to be employees, but there was a court case taken and they were deemed to be employees. Now whether that might be changed around, but it kind of at least kind of gives them some kind of solid footing, some kind of rights, and it can be very exploitative otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's issues around, there's a really big push for regulation at the moment, but sort of if we don't then sort of like, if we don't look at hostile environment policies at the same time, regulation basically means that there's a sector that's kind of left behind. And so it's like only nannies with secure status who are able to be regulated. So it's like it's a bit of a tricky situation at the moment. But anyway.
Cool. I'm going to give just another couple of minutes, but check how many more apologies are coming in. I was saying, I don't know if there's like something seismic going on somewhere else, Sarah, but I've had a bit of a kind of flurry of people going, I'm really sorry, suddenly kind of not able to make it this afternoon. But we've said we'll go ahead and we'll record it anyway, so then people can pick up the conversation afterwards. I'm really conscious, Darragh and I have spoken a few times, and it just feels like there are a lot of parallels, but also that there's loads for us to learn from Ireland, because you've been working on the ground for a good 3 or 4 years ahead of us, Darragh. So there's that sense kind of what we can pick up as well.
Yeah, and all the mistakes that we've made. hopefully you can avoid them.
Some clues as well to sort of think about how we move around some stuff. Cool. Okay. 2 more minutes. I'll give it till 5 past, just in case anyone picks up. But yeah, we were saying we'll do like a proper kind of intro as well, so that we can have more of a conversation. Although Veronica's obviously explained she's also juggling nap time, which is a challenge I'm kind of relieved I don't have to deal with so much anymore. They've just been kind of frantically WhatsApping about getting my daughter to walk from, you know, a house around the corner to here within a certain time frame to make sure that that happens. It's a slightly different space.
Nap time sounds like a great idea. I think it should be for all of us. I think we should do it.
Yeah, universal nap time instead of the 4-day week, perhaps.
I can't understand the nap time protest. I'd love a nap time.
I remember that was definitely when I was helping at this nursery in Canada, where we took it in turns to do a duty day as a parent, so you like the extra pair of hands. And at nap time, the staff would be like, okay, let's all just lie down with the children. We'll all just darken the lights and everyone can just feel really calm. And I could feel myself within about 2 minutes being like, am I meant to be sleeping? Because I'm definitely asleep. Like,
no, I've definitely fallen asleep.
It was a really tricky one, really tricky. Cool. Well, look, let's kick off, and then people can come in and join, because if we're doing go rounds and introducing ourselves as well, there's a bit more time. So obviously I've said hi before, but for the purposes of the recording as well, I'm Lucy and I work at NEF, and I guess over the last 2 years we've been doing two things there. One is very practical work with parents in Deptford, trying to set up a new nursery that is parent-led, so it has a really strong parent voice and parents and children at the centre of that. We opened last month, and at the same time working on the national picture in terms of why it is so difficult to get childcare right. And the work so far has been focused, you know, on what the challenges are and what's going wrong, but increasingly trying to focus on what good policy and good practice would look like to get us to a better place, and how to develop a campaign with all of the stakeholders who have a vested interest in childcare working. So yeah, that's me. Sarah, do you want to go next? Sarah, sorry.
Hi, thanks, Lucy. So I'm Sarah. I'm from the Women's Budget Group, so head of research and policy there. For those of you who don't know what we do, so we are a sort of a feminist think tank. So we analyze economic policy for its impact on women and men, and we also promote and encourage gender budgeting. So our interest in childcare is very much from a sort of macroeconomics kind of perspective. So how it should be funded, but also how it should be set up and delivered. In our interest in this sector is sort of twofold. It's because it's a sector that is massively important for women's employment, because it's a sector that employs a vast majority of women in its workforce, and also it's crucial for women in general and mothers in particular to be able to progress in their careers and be in the labor market. So we've done some work around funding, and particularly around how to fund a universal free childcare system in the UK. So we've sort of costed how much would it need to be a functioning, high quality, free and universal from 6 months to primary school. And we also found that it's because of the impact that it would have in terms of more employment for women in particular, and all the impacts on the economy, and the indirect impacts on the economy, that it would be nearly self-sufficient in the way. So the investment will be recouped after a few years. Yeah, and so that's mostly the work that we've done around childcare. It's mostly around funding, how to fund it.
And you've been doing some brilliant work on a care-led recovery as well, and comparing investment in a care-led approach versus a construction-led approach, which is just phenomenal, showing the benefits. I quote at
Yes.
every point.
So more recently, we've looked at comparison between how much, what the impact would be of investing in the care sector to recovery-wise, as opposed to investing in construction. And what we find is that the returns in terms of number of jobs would be much higher investing in care than it would be investing in construction. And also it's a very low carbon intensive industry, the care sector. So there are also sort of environmental questions attached in terms of its benefits.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. Miranda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Miranda. I'm also a researcher at NEF, but I'm particularly interested in like strategies for building the collective power and voice of parents and workers. I'm really keen to learn from examples of like successful unionisation in other countries, because it's so bleak in the UK, and like understanding the like barriers to that happening, or the like challenges, particularly in relation to like a heavily financialized sector and the threat that poses to unionization, and it being a like traditionally feminized or like women's sector, and the sort of like guilt of striking from care work, and like, and therefore the need for parent worker solidarity.
Brilliant, thanks, Miranda. And Veronica, if you've got the chance, then it would be great to hear from you, but if you're still dealing with nap time, don't.
No, that's okay. I will be brief, but I'm Veronica. I am the co-founder and organizer with Nanny Solidarity Network. So we are sort of a mutual aid group that provides sort of resources and sort of space for collective action for nannies and au pairs. We predominantly support migrant nannies. That wasn't necessarily by design, but that is... In a second, thank you. That was by design, but that's just kind of how it's happened. So now we're setting up a union with IWGP. And we are also looking into things like grant funding, providing things like English classes, immigration support, and kind of just rethinking what a union can look like for migrant workers, because obviously sort of the traditional power you have as sort of a group of workers in a collective setting doesn't necessarily apply to in-home workers. So yeah, I think it's, thank you. So I'm going to leave it there, but I'm very excited to hear what Darragh has to say. So thank you.
Fantastic. Darragh, do you want to sort of introduce yourself and then run through a few, we talked about putting some slides together just to kind of give us some headlines, and then we can come back into a conversation if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks,
Right.
Lucy. Hello, everyone. So yeah, my name is Darragh O'Connor, and I'm the head of organising and campaigns with SIBTU. So that's the largest union in Ireland. It's a general union, so we have private sector and public sector workers. So what I'm going to do is kind of take you through the campaign that we have to organise childcare workers, early years educators, some of the kind of the key planks of that campaign, to kind of show, like, at least trying to take you through kind of the learnings, the mistakes, and what's working and what's not working, and then hopefully use that as a conversation to see, well, how would you apply maybe some of this to something in the UK. I'm trying to hit the balance between detail and kind of you know breadth and kind of depth on it, so bear with me. So what I'm going to do is share, if the host is disabled, participant screen sharing.
Oh, that was, I knew
That's all
there
I
was
knew, Lucy.
something I needed to do. Right. Hang on. I'm making you the co-host. There we go. So you should be able to share now. Okay.
So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
And slideshow from the, okay. So this is a picture of an action that people took. Everyone wear red day. So even before the union got involved in this sector, there had been a lot of discussion between kind of key stakeholders, provider groups and children's rights groups and women's groups and that kind of stuff. And there had been really kind of a shared vision of what the sector should be. And this is kind of relatively universal, right? You kind of get this in a lot of the other European countries and beyond as well. It's that it should be high quality for children because there's long-term benefits and cognitive development, emotional development, and also the capacity to learn long-term, all that good stuff. It should be affordable, which I think Sarah was talking about as well, right? High cost childcare is an obstacle to women engaging in the workforce, women and men, but disproportionately women, and that it should be accessible, right? It should be kind of close by. So they're the kind of the three principles that are really hard to argue against. People might argue about where you spend your money, right? Whether you should spend it in roads or childcare, but usually these arguments are kind of, very few people argue against these three kind of key pillars of it. And it's really kind of around this that we've built our campaign. And from a union point of view, the paying conditions, we link that into the high quality. So we don't lead off with paying. Obviously, we talk about paying conditions, but there's a consequence to it. What really kind of gains traction is the high quality. And of course, lots of our members are ordinary workers and who are paying really high fees. So that's there's another kind of imperative there organizationally. So just in terms of what the ground looks like in Ireland for childcare, so there's 4,500 services. A quarter of them are not for profit, 3/4 are for profit, and the corporate sector is probably below 10%. So tiny compared to what you have in the UK. Was probably kind of, and definitely the corporate end of it is very, very different, right? It's dominating in the UK. They have a huge amount of sway, where I think you probably have a majority of providers in Ireland who are there trying to do the right thing, and they're people that that a union can work with. And in terms of kind of where the funding is going in now at the moment, there's a free preschool year, so that's 3 hours a day, 38 weeks a year. And you get 2 years of that, and that's completely free, completely funded by the government. And then there's a subsidy scheme as well based on your income levels. So the big issues, and I'm sure this resonates with yourselves as well, it's high fees, it's low pay, and the low pay is adding to a really high turnover rate. It's 40% in full day care, and the OECD has done some stuff showing how high turnover rates undermine quality for children. And really, the level of investment is quite low by European standards. I think we were tied for last place in the European leagues with the UK. I think that's all ours now. And it's like someone has to pay for it, right? Bad quality childcare costs, high quality childcare costs even more, right? So it's either parents or the state. That's someone has to pay for it. And similar to yourselves, we have a market model approach, and there is, there's no country in the world that adopts a market model that is able to deliver on those three key policy goals of affordability, quality, and accessibility. And kind of one of the kind of key insights that we had, there's an economist who started working on the campaign when we were about kind of a year or two in, and one of his key insights was that in this system, there's a conflict between affordability and quality. So the state can put in money, and then it's up to the provider to choose what to do with that. That's what we have in Ireland. And so that they can either improve quality by improving wages and reducing turnover and skilling people up, that kind of end of it, or that they can address affordability by cutting the fees that they have. But what we have at the moment is a conflict between those two, and I think that insight kind of offers an indicator of what you need to do to solve the problem, is to kind of break that link between those two. So the solutions that are bandied about, right? We have the good ones and the bad ones, right? Tax breaks for parents. Politicians love it. It's really simple. Parents like it as well. If you're paying on the highest rate of tax, parents like it. If you're very low paid or pay or a low rate of tax, that actually doesn't do a huge amount for you. So that's like, so that pops up every now and again, like a whack-a-mole. We kind of have to try, and with politicians, you have to kind of knock that one back down again. The payments to parents is kind of a popular one then as well. That kind of comes up. Direct payments, and whatever they want to do, whether they want to spend it on childcare, if they want to stay at home, right? So that's an argument as well. I suppose the problem that we'd have with it is that it doesn't drive quality. You're still left with bad quality, and bad quality for children it's detrimental to children if they're going into such poor quality services. So that's kind of a problem there as well. And I suppose the final bad policy that we'd see it is kind of subsidies. And we have an income-based subsidy regime, but we don't have a fee cap. So you can put in your subsidies, but the fees just keep on going up. This is just like the state is like shoveling in money, profits rise, fees rise. It isn't doing the business. So I think if that was just on its own, we think it's pretty poor. So in terms of what you might do, well, public provision is pretty good, isn't it? Like we're all good socialists here. The state delivering good public childcare. We don't have any of that, and I think there's a scattering in the UK then as well. But that's like we didn't go down that path for a couple of different reasons. But like literally, the infrastructure is owned is in private hands, but it's not for profit or private. How do you do that? That's a real kind of big problem about the infrastructure, the bricks and mortar of it all. The next one is the one that we're advocating for, is directly funding the wages. And that's how we think you can break that tension between affordability and quality, is that the state assumes the funding for the wages. That's how you funnel money in, so that you have grab a hold of where the money goes. And it's kind of similar to how Norway do their business. Norway have, if you want to set up, right, that you run your service, you'll get money from the local authority, but there's a fees caps and there's pay scales in place. And then there's, you can make your profit. And it's not ideal, but it demarketizes the system. And I think that's probably the space that we're in, that we're not able to do. You wouldn't start from here. If you did, you do the public provision. But how do you demarketize, I think, is the question. So a little bit about just kind of where the power lies. And this is kind of in descending order as well. Like the state obviously has a huge amount of power, and they can make laws and set regulations. But in Ireland, they're funding around 70% of the sector. So loads of public money going in with little control. And that's a kind of a good argument that we're making. And that gives them an incredible amount of leverage that they're not using effectively. And I think this is kind of a good one, right? That if you can win those arguments of what the sector should look like, or your broad policy goals at that kind of governmental level or local authority level, you can kind of put your checks and balances onto the funding. Obviously, providers are key stakeholders as well, and they have a lot of power. And in a way, how do you approach them? How do you fit them into maybe an overarching campaign? Corporate providers will if there's money on the table, they're not going to leave it behind, right? So they might be up for doing some kind of business, some kind of deal, even if it is kind of a bit more kind of state regulation. If there's funding going, right, that's something definitely to be thinking of. The workers and the organized labor piece, like the scale of the challenge to try and bring around radical change is like, it's really, really big. It's incredibly big in Ireland. It's even more so in the UK. And you need kind of industrial strength to be able to deliver that. Like there's just, I don't know if you can do it without that kind of union bit. Says the union organizer, but like it's, it takes a huge kind of really big push. And then, parents are kind of a key, lots of taxpayers. It's a big issue for parents. When you're paying really high fees, it's a really big issue. And then you're not, because your kids go to primary school, and then it's not an issue. So it's a very kind of intense period. But like, are there parents organizations that you can get on board, that can maybe mobilize those folks? If there isn't, can you build one? And then kind of NGOs, I suppose we're in brackets there, like particularly like women's organizations and children's organizations, I think are very kind of strong voices in this, and particularly around quality, at least in my experience. And I think if you're building your coalition, I think they're kind of key to getting that on board. And exactly the Sarah's work there as well is kind of really interesting. You need like good, strong advocates who are kind of all singing off the same hymn sheet in this kind of agreed, what is it that you want to see change, or what's the plan? I'm almost at the end. So, roughly what we're about, you need to increase state investment. We want to make sure that money is spent effectively. So that's why we're talking about a reformed funding model. And then there's a very union bit is around some kind of agreement on pay. And, lots of other non-union organizations are happy about the pay bit because turnover is so bad and quality's, and it's undermining quality. So that's why they're kind of like up for that. So I think this is my last slide. So the bit about the coalition, I kind of want to say just a couple of words on that. So it's key that you get as much of the sector all singing from the same hymn sheet, agreeing your kind of core principles, but also maybe trying to go in a little bit deeper about what the proposals are. And the deeper, the better, but obviously you'll lose people along the way. And you do those strands that I was talking about, the quality, affordable, accessible, they're the strands that will inform how you build up that kind of coalition piece. I think one of the mistakes that, what's the hub of that coalition as well? Because one of the tensions that like we had a union that started off really small and is kind of pretty, medium sized now, the biggest membership organization, but you'll have pre-existing players on the pitch. So I think the Early Years Alliance, I think, is one of the biggest provider, right? They're kind of key partners, right? They're not going to join a union campaign. But so what's the safe space for them? How do you get people all around the table? Maybe that table exists. I'm not too sure. So that's something to think about, how you approach that. I would have done it differently kind of in hindsight. Communications, kind of good regular communications, and we can kind of skip past that actually. The organizing piece, and by that I mean a kind of a union organizing piece. We took a kind of a neutral to positive stance towards providers and saying, hey, you care about quality, you want to do the right thing by your employees. A lot of them said yes. And we said, okay, well, we got a plan, but people got to join the union. Right. So that's how we tried to go in the front door rather than around the back. That works to a certain extent. I think particularly now, and during the pandemic, there's a lot of work that could be done through digital organizing, which is another whole other conversation. And like Unison are getting their head around at the moment about how to do that kind of stuff. And then, you build your army, your union army, but also the kind of other people in the army then as well. And then you kind of do your campaigning and all your different campaigning actions and try to make it a political issue. And obviously the next election would be kind of, that would be the kind of the time horizons for yourselves and ourselves. And I suppose, so just one last thing on the coalition, like it's kind of shaky from our end, and it kind of, there's lots of kind of, it's dynamic. So there's kind of like sometimes this little alliances coming and going, and people are on board or they're not on board, and I don't want to give the impression that that's a rock solid piece, but there's kind of more of a journey that is going in the right direction, but it's people are on it, and then it's a little bit shaky, and that's really damaging to the kind of the overall effort of the sector. It's damaging to all of us, but there's lots of weird things happening, and some kind of really key organizations that get state funding, and that kind of keeps them in check, so they can go so far. And sorry, one last thing. I've been speaking for a good while now. Just some kind of reflections. Listening to Helen Penn and Peter Moss recently, and just kind of some of the scale of the sector is really big, right? So in Ireland, we have 12 organisers working to organise 4,500 employments. I don't know how many providers, how many services there are in the UK, but that's the equivalent of what, 1,000 union organisers. I don't know. It's a lot. So it's really hard to. Do you take it up at a national level, or kind of a local authority level? Because you're thinking about, where does the money flow from? It flows from the centre, from Westminster, but so you think that's where you need to put on you want to have those conversations, put on that control, but like that's really, really tough. The scope of the campaign, like saying to Lucy, like, what the hell do you do about the corporate providers? Like, they dominate so much. They're going to be incredibly powerful. I mean, I was being optimistic when I said, like, if there's money on the table, they might do the deal, but their instincts will be to burn like everybody down to the ground, and don't you get in my way of making profits. And then, you know, the allies in that bit, and funny enough, the Early Years Alliance in the UK did reach out to myself back when we had a really big protest back in February of early this year. So they're, you know, they're obviously they're looking around. And then they ask, like, do you have, you know, can you have a kind of a clear ask that people kind of agree around, and what is that? And it's not, you know, is it around the funding model, but like it's a really kind of hard one to kind of grab a hold of, just because of the nature of just how big the sector is. And I think it's probably needs something a little bit different from, I don't think you can replicate it completely from Ireland to the UK. There's big kind of different dynamics on the ground. Okay, and then there's like pictures of all that kind of stuff, right? Stuff does happen, right? And here's pictures of people doing their quotes and ministers saying, I join a union, and that was a big protest that we had. So that was all really, really good. So I'll shut up now, and if people have kind of questions, sorry, now I don't know how to get out of this. I need to stop sharing the screen. Sorry, yeah, if people have questions, sorry, I'm going to try and get out of this. It's not letting me do it. There we go. Okay.
Thanks, Darragh. That was brilliant. And I've just noticed that Kate has joined us as well. So, hi, Kate. Kate, the rest of us did like a quick go around just to explain, because there's a smaller group this week, to explain kind of what we're working on and why we're interested in childcare. So do you want to just do that, just so that everyone, I know you did it in the chat box last time, but just so everyone's got a chance to hear from you.
Yeah, that's fine. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was a bit late. So I'm Kate Hardy. I work at the Leeds Business School, and we're doing a project on the impact of COVID on the childcare sector. And that includes looking at workers' experiences as well as parents' experiences of accessing childcare. So trying to think of it in the round between informal care and formal care. So looking at nurseries as well as childminders and nannies who are working formally and informally. But a lot of my work is on women's informal organising, particularly in the sex industry. So I'm also really interested in the unionisation angle of thinking about how you organise feminised workers. So I've got some questions about that.
So yeah, we can open for questions. I see Miranda's got her hand up, but yeah, let's go for it.
Hey, thank you so much for that. It's like amazing what you've done, and like seeing a photo of that many childcare workers in the street, like, is really emotional. Like, because it feels so far from where we are here. So yeah, I feel like I have loads of questions, but I'll try and focus them. I guess, like, because I don't know much about this tool. So what's your like union density across the sector, and how does that vary by like types of provider? Like, do you have any chain nurseries, and like, are any of those unionized? Because again, that's I currently, like, I'm really struggling to get my head around how we make that happen. And leading on from that, when you talked about like demarketizing, which is like obviously what we're ultimately trying to achieve, and there are different levers for doing that, and like one would just be a socialist government brings it into public ownership, or like a bailout that had lots of conditions attached. A bit hard, but I guess it's about creating, I think you were talking about that in relation to like fees and wages. So you're creating an environment in which a profit-driven provider like cannot survive, essentially. Is that like, could you explain that a bit more, how that demarketization works, and over what kind of time period?
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah, and the final thing, I guess this is to Lucy and maybe Sarah or Kate as well. Like, I hadn't got my head around. So you said 70% of the sector is like publicly funded. What's the percentage in the UK? Because I think you're right in terms of that like case for leverage, in terms of the argument about like public funds ending up in like the pockets of shareholders, or like making best use of that. But I can't think actually off the top of my head what that percentage is in the UK, and therefore how much that case stands.
Cool.
Okay, so really, really good questions there. So union density is around 25%, and that's gone up from like 1 or 2% previously over the last 5 years. And the kind of industrial strategy has been to, we want to set rates of pay using the sectoral employment order. And we're not going to, we don't organize on a employer by employer basis. We're organizing the sector as a whole. So our target isn't, there's an employer making loads of money, we're going to go after you and squeeze the money out of you, because we'd be doing that for the rest of our lives, because because you'll have 4,500 fights. We're having one big fight, and we're having that fight with the government. So we're saying, you're putting in a lot of money in here. You know that quality is poor. You know that that's down to low pay. We want more money in, and we want it earmarked specifically for pay. And we're probably one budget away from getting some kind of proper movement on that. So that explains why. So we haven't really we'd have members in kind of corporate chains, but they're like, in the main, they're not kind of having those kind of hard-nosed fights at the enterprise level, at the local level. So we kind of took a decision with the corporates, like, we're just going to let them off, right? We're not going to waste our time getting bogged down in the trenches with them, because we got keep the eye on the prize. We don't need them. They can't block us, that was kind of a deliberate kind of decision. Now there's kind of things have shifted, and there was cases about the mechanisms that we can use. That's getting very kind of technical, Irish trade union kind of stuff. But that's kind of generally the approach, is that keep the eye. It's the government, it's the funding. We can work around them. The piece about the demarketization. So really, that's kind of the long-term kind of change piece. And what we're not saying is the state has to run it all. We're kind of saying, what we are saying is that, there is a place for providers, for these community not-for-profits, and for the for-profit, right? And for the chains, right? But that it's going to be a very different world. That the money that's going to come in, that you're not going to be competing on price or quality or wages. We're going to take them out. So the fees, that's going to be, they're going to be regulated. The wages, they're going to be regulated. There'll be a space for a reasonable profit, right? But essentially that's going to be determined by the state. And because the state is putting in so much money, it kind of gives it that leverage to be able to do it. And kind of what they're going to do is they're going to offer an opt-in model. Here's our new funding model. We give you a lot more money, but it comes with all these strings attached, and you're going to have to opt. If you want it, you're going to have to opt into it. And most of them should, because it'll be cheaper and you'll be paying higher wages, right? So that'll make you way more attractive to employees and to parents. So you would expect private providers to jump up for that as well, but it's like the days of really kind of sweating the assets, which is another word for exploitation, right? That's kind of what you want to end. So it's not like, of course you'd love public provision. I just don't. You can't get it from here. You can't get to there from where we are right now. Maybe another couple of steps, but this is the at least a halfway house.
Thanks, that's brilliant. I can see Veronica's popped her hand up, so let's go to Veronica.
Hi, I want to reiterate what Miranda said. I feel really, really inspired by everything you said, and it's incredible what you've been able to achieve. I think that it feels like on such a large scale, it's really galvanizing for what maybe we can recreate in England. I think my question was specifically about I know that you did the childcare strike earlier in the year, which sounds really amazing. And I'm curious as to whether that was including informal workers or workers like childminders and nannies, and if so, how were you able to mobilize workers that are in isolated settings? Because that is a real barrier for us in terms of striking and campaigning, is that we've got, you know, all of our members are in isolated settings as opposed to something like a nursery. So if they were involved, I'd love to hear a bit more about how you maybe tackled those barriers and were able to overcome them.
Yeah.
Thanks, Veronica.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't know if we've actually achieved anything yet. You know, like people are still, we don't have a pay deal and we don't have a new funding model, so it's still a long way to go. I mean, we've done lots of mobilizations and put it on the political agenda and commitments, right? That doesn't butter the parsnips. So what that was earlier on in the year, that big mobilization. So it wasn't actually a strike. Sorry, it wasn't technically, it wasn't a strike. The laws that we have here is that you have to, everyone has to be ballot. Sorry, it's the same over there. You have to ballot all your people, and you have to ballot by employer to be able to technically have a strike. And then, you know, that would be a massive operation to ballot 4,500 employers or whatever, 2,000 employers where we are. So that was this weird, you know, coalition of providers and, you know, the union and kind of other kind of groups who've been knocking around the place saying things have to change, and where our interests align, our interests definitely aligned around increased funding and improving pay and all that kind of good stuff as well. So it was more of a shutdown than a strike, I suppose, and that's probably the easier way to be able to take action is through that kind of coalition approach, right? And that was kind of designed as a pre-election kind of action as well to put it on the agenda. So that's why the makeup of the coalition is kind of interesting, and then what those coalition partners are willing to do. Some of them will be willing to do those actions, others just couldn't, right? And then others, there's all these kind of interpersonal, inter-organizational rivalries, you know, if one person's in, right? So you have to kind of navigate through all that kind of stuff as well. But that took that was way bigger than I thought it was going to be. Like, I thought on a good day we'd hit 15,000, like on a really good day, and it was double that. Like, it took on a momentum of its own. And but sorry, to answer your question, that was, I'd say, almost exclusive. Sorry, it was workers in creches, in formal employment, plus providers, plus parents, plus, you know, the usual 100 people who turn up to every trade union event, you know, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it did reach beyond. There's more people on the streets than actually work in the sector. So it definitely tapped into something fairly deep. I think there would be, I think that you need a kind of a different approach for the you need a kind of a different approach for the nannies, don't you? Like the nannies in that kind of informal care, you know, it's building the network and then figuring out, well, what is it that you want to change and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think, sorry, there's a little bit of a waffly answer. I think you need to be kind of fairly focused on what you want. Like, we had a 1 page, we had 5 key points, you know, and this is what we're going to live and die on this, right? And it can't, for you to try have any kind of realistic impact on kind of policymakers and politicians, you need to be kind of really kind of clear and concise about what you're looking for. And you can't be too broad. It has to be like nice and sharp and tight. So that's, so no is the short answer.
Kate, did you say you had some questions you wanted to ask?
I didn't, but I do. Yeah, actually, a lot of them have already been asked, but I guess I was going to ask to go a bit deeper on the demarketisation question, in that one thing that, for example, the Early Years Alliance is asking for is some sort of temporary bailout for the childcare sector. But I don't really like the term bailout, because somehow I feel like there's like failure built into it, and that could be put on the sector somehow, and that it's the government kind of stepping in and saving the day, and therefore you owe something. So like, I think we could do with changing the language around what's like asked for there. And essentially what that could be is some sort of temporary demarketisation of the sector. that's quite targeted maybe, or is around certain features, which could then be like the Trojan horse to saying, wow, you did it during COVID, and look, I don't know, quality went up, more deprived families accessed childcare, etc., etc. So just wondered if you had like any ideas about kind of specific ways in which, this is to everyone as well, specific things that could be asked for on a temporary basis in England and Wales that could become this kind of that could become longer term policy. And just building on your experience of that really kind of it's like demarketization by stealth, like the opposite of like privatization, how they normally do privatization. It doesn't look like it's being kind of decommodified or demarketized, but it is, by kind of using their own, in a way, their own mechanisms.
Yeah, and on that, Darragh, perhaps you could just give us a little of that, what did happen under COVID, because I know it was different in the childcare group settings, at least, were closed entirely, but there wasn't there, that chance where the government did temporarily at least start to pay staff wages and lift up wages that were less than living wage. Just kind of getting a bit of a grip around that would be great, because that's in stark contrast to what's gone on in England, but also where that's headed in the future, whether that's now entrenched or if you're having to kind of fight to hold on to.
So yeah, look, we have a centre-right government, and we have a new government now that's kind of roughly centre-right as well. But during the early lockdown of COVID, like, extraordinary things happened. We had like a nationalised health service. You know, we effectively had a nationalised childcare service as well, like this stuff that people have been talking about for, you know, years and years and years. So exactly as Lucy was saying there, one of the measures that was brought in was that anyone who's laid off from employment got €350 per week, and as a whether you were earning €5 a week or, you know, like, it doesn't matter, everyone got a minimum of 350, and that was state subsidy basically to kind of, you know, so people could pay, you know, rent and put food on the table and all that kind of stuff. And that, in the childcare sector, that was topped up so that everyone got at least 350, and then you got your normal wage then as well. And that was all, and that's how the state put the vast bulk of the money that went into the childcare sector. That's how they did it. They supported the wages of the workers, and there was little kind of bits and pieces here and there for the providers. And that's, you know, that took care of 70% of a provider's outgoings. Sorry, and this is when they were all shut down, right? Because they were all shut down, and the schools were all shut down as well. So that's like, we were like saying, oh my God, like, this is what we've been talking about, and kind of like haven't launched a big campaign around this, but have done all the kind of chats with, you know, civil servants and politicians, and kind of like getting feedback and all that kind of stuff. It's like, this is it, like, this is the promised land. And it was a glimpse of what was impossible 2 months ago was now absolutely, it wasn't just possible, it was being implemented. And I think it does, like, it does kind of like put it on the table in a bit more of a real way. And, you know, providers loved it and workers loved it and all that kind of stuff. So I think, like, that's essentially that kind of demarketization piece, or it went a long way to it. But one of the things that was happening was that one of the motivations for that and for that approach was that in services that were 100% state funded, and they laid off their staff. Not all of them, but some of them did, and the story started coming back. So now you have a service with almost no outgoings and 100% of incomings, because they kept the funding there. And they say, well, this is great. This is the most profitable year they've ever had. And so the policymakers, the people in the department, are saying, well, hold on, we potentially we're going to lose all the workers out of here, and these guys over here, like, this is, you know, absolutely taking the piss. So, you know, we're gonna change this. We're gonna cut back that funding. So what's happening now is that that's been mostly undone. There's still kind of a residual. There is still money going directly towards wages, but this is it. Parents are back paying fees. All the other kind of funding streams are coming back in. If you're at full capacity, you're actually doing very well. This is still one of your more profitable years, and I suppose it sets the scene for there's an expert group who are looking at a new funding model in Ireland, and they're expected to report back mid next year. So we want to kind of try and influence that as much as possible. And I suppose that event of paying the wages might shift the debate within those groups. I don't know if that's any help to you. Sorry, I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but like, yeah, it makes it kind of possible, like, you know, but I think it's very different in the UK, isn't it? Like that just places are they not getting funding and closing down and all that?
Yeah, I mean, partly in answer to Miranda's question, I suppose where we've got to with England is, so parents were being asked to continue to pay fees even though they didn't have places or couldn't access places, and the Competition and Markets Authority investigated that, and they've kind of sort of encouraged people to use common sense and not do that now. Yeah, kind of a bit after the time, but most settings receive some public funding, but you know, overall government's putting in, I think they say 5.6 billion to childcare through different routes, tax-free childcare and paying for some free hours. But then that is topped up by parents' fees. So 50% settings are currently running on about 50% occupancy levels. It's not clear how many parents are continuing to pay for places that they're not using, but parents are definitely not going back in the numbers that they used to. But also over the summer, there were reports of some of the bigger chains saying they are not going to take public funding anymore. They're not going to allow parents to use free hours anymore because those hours are underfunded so much that they can't, even the very good providers, or particularly the very good providers, say you can't provide high quality care on the hourly rate that government currently invests in free childcare. And so you've got a ridiculous situation where providers are essentially having to push up hourly fees to parents for the hours that are not free hours from government, because government is so chronically underfunding the hours that they're giving you for free. So their own kind of intervention is increasing fees to people, which is bonkers. But there is that kind of growing number who are starting to say they're not going to take free hours at all. And that is quite a new turnaround, and it is definitely that sort of space. And one of the things they've done as a tiny step towards disconnecting funding per head, per child, into a kind of more general pot of funding is just for this term, they've said, we'll pay you for the number of children we'd expect you to have at this time of the year, not on the actual number in the census that will be there, but they're stopping that after Christmas. And yeah, 1 in 4 are saying they're going to close for good by then, and 70% are running at a debt at the minute. So there's a real kind of question mark. And interestingly, chatting to a few people this week from some of the not-for-profit chains, they were talking about numbers of redundancies starting to come through from some of the bigger chains, partly on the basis of what's going on in England, but also that some of those very big chains have got kind of big assets in the US as well. And the collapse of childcare in the US is, if it were possible, even worse than what's going on in England. And so managing their global portfolio is meaning that they're kind of shifting things around as well. So to some extent, we're, through public funds in England, propping up corporate losses in the US.
I mean, you know, that definitely, like in the crisis is always like, I mean, you know, it's always a good opportunity and to see like what's going on. And I suppose, I mean, I don't know the players in the UK, but like the corporates are going to have, they have a plan, and they're working hard to kind of get that over the line. And does anyone else have a plan? You know, on the side of the good, right? Is anyone else really at the table and advocating this is, because one of them will be, you know, I'll just increase that, you know, the free hours. But I mean, if you're a parent sending, you know, full daycare, well, the overall fees can go up and up. You know, they kind of just gets absorbed. So like it actually mightn't do, for maybe some parents, it actually doesn't do anything for affordability. But yeah, and like, you know, that kind of pressure does open up space for change. But it's whether, yeah, where's the countervailing forces?
Yeah, and the sense at the moment, again, kind of just from conversations with people, is the place in which there's not much wriggle room is in the ratios, in the requirement of adult to child ratios, and that's the spot that periodically comes back and gets pushed. So we should, if we could have fewer staff around, our costs go down, with, as you say, no conditionality necessarily, so no guarantee that translates into cheaper fees for parents, but also pretty much a guarantee that that's lower quality, because if you've got, you know, 4 or 5 children being looked after by one adult instead of 2 or 3, it changes the quality of the interaction for the children. But interestingly, again, like some of the providers I've spoken to have said that that is one area where you can quite quickly mobilize parents, and that there was a really big response to that in 2016, 2017, when the coalition government suggested changing that. So that might become kind of a point of contest in the new year. And also, I think, like, we are talking a lot about corporates, and there is this kind of top end who are massive and global and difficult to manage. But I think also, as you talked about the conditions and the conditionality and a way of pushing behaviours in a certain way, I think there are also smaller providers who may technically be corporate, but are particularly kind of female entrepreneurs, locally based, small scale, invested in what they do, and accountable to their communities. And I think if we can find a way to start to differentiate them from some of those real kind of fly-by-night private equity providers, there's some benefit in that too. And as you talk about the Norway model and the conditions attached to funding, I think there are a group of providers in that camp who absolutely could use that as a positive badge, or a way to start to kind of talk up more of what they have been trying to do within very kind of tight constraints, rather than it being completely clearing the field of everybody. But there are those at the kind of top end who are really kind of pushing boundaries of provision, and absolutely need reining in to some extent.
Exactly. Sorry, just one point on that, because you do need to find your wedge between like that provider block, and you need to kind of be able to kind of separate them out. And I think one bit that's worked for us is talking about the corporates, as small as they are, and the corporate takeover, because a lot of the smaller providers go, like, you know, they're pretty, they don't like the look of it, and they know that they could be up for the chop as well. So they're kind of, and it helps them define themselves, like, as in, well, we're on the side of the light rather than them.
Miranda, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, another question. I'd be interested to hear more about like how you got to the point where SIP2 decided to like seriously allocate resource to this. Or I think you said you hired 12 organisers. Like, what did it take for that to happen? Because like in the UK, like Unison have been saying that they're thinking about organising private nursery workers for ages, and they're not. And like the TUC is interested in sectoral collective bargaining, and like contacts we have within the TUC have said that like childcare is an area they might explore for that. But what does it take within the union for like that strategic decision to be made?
So yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think unions in the UK and in Ireland and in a few other kind of European countries, you might know, like, union density is going down, right? Worker power is being reduced. It's not, and continually kind of reducing as well. So some unions have decided we have to get into organising. We need to break into new industries. We need to be able to organise and build power where there hasn't been traditionally unions, because a lot of the old industries are going, right? So they kind of need to be replaced. And a lot of those are in industries that are hard to organise, right? Childcare being one. That is like that, and home care. Like, these will break your heart, you know, trying to organise them. They're tough going, and they're labour intensive. But what some of the unions, or a lot of the unions have done, is that they've set up specific organising departments, and that there's an allocation within them. So SIP2 kind of historically, for the last, I'm working there like I think 15, 16 years. I was one of the first 4 organisers to be hired there. So there was a kind of and this is the first campaign that we've worked on where it's like a sector-wide campaign. So we're kind of taking on something as ambitious as that, so that there's an infrastructure in place, that we've built up the skills, knowledge, and that they kind of just, you know, it was in the offing, and it was something that I always wanted to do, and the people were, you know, I was able to kind of open up that bit of space and get the resources for it. Okay. So it is a massive commitment, and I think any union that has the ability or approaching the ability to be able to take on a campaign like this in the UK will not that they'll do it where they'll be very kind of sure that they're going to be able to have a good go at this, because what they're not going to do is on a whim allocate loads and loads of money and people and resources and not have a kind of a well thought out plan. That's I hope that they don't do that, because you'll get one good crack at it, and then if you can't, what are you waiting another 5-10 years before you can go again and all that kind of stuff. So my advice would be and it depends where these unions are at the moment as well, like what's on their plate, because I know unions are doing a lot of work with home care, I think it is, or up around that, so they commit a lot of resources. This is something on their horizon, but they're not just there yet. What I do is, like, if you're kind of pulling together the kind of the bones of a working group or potential coalition, is to get the TUC. Definitely, I think Unison are probably the best bet on this kind of stuff, and to try and get someone senior, not to commit any resources or anything like that, but just get someone senior in at this kind of early planning stage to as a place marker for your union piece. And because through the process, you kind of say you want them to be excited about it and see, okay, wow, this is doable and there's a solid plan. Now that might take a year to kind of for all that kind of stuff as well. And they might be in a different space, and they might be able to start allocating resources to it. And to I think that's the best way to kind of bring them on board. And I think you do need someone like the scale of a Unison, or another big union. I think unions are probably the ones who are best placed to do this. You need something that big to have a crack at it. Even like I'm thinking, like Ireland has a population of 4 million. I mean, that's not even. You wouldn't even take on Childcare Manchester, that's the kind of size of it. And then we're talking about like something for the whole of the UK. So there's a lot of thinking of how do you break this into manageable chunks, that's what I'm saying. It's just they need to be brought in. The TUC is grand, but I think it'd be really good to get someone from Unison into that conversation. Yeah. And sorry, one last thing. Sorry, like, do you take on Scotland? Can you break it up like regionally into Scotland and Wales, or can you do it on a local, like on a local authority level? I don't know is the answer, but that might be they might serve as a kind of a proof of concept before you kind of take on England then.
Yeah, and education is devolved. So Wales and Scotland have both, and Northern Ireland have each taken slightly different approaches and are responding to the crisis in different ways. And I know Lee, who's going to do a session on Save the Salford 5, got involved as a parent to campaign for change there, but was then able to make links into Unison locally, who've been then kind of really supportive in their campaign. So I guess that's also something for us to think about as a global campaign, kind of where are there actors already or actions that are sort of starting to grow, and how to start to perhaps kind of weave those together if we can help to create a story around that, because there's that combination between the kind of the proactive national approach and the more reactive grassroots campaigns that maybe are already going on or starting to bubble up, where perhaps then union kind of actors locally can connect to and support, but making sure that then leads into kind of more coordinated commitment in the medium to long term. Because like you say, we don't want to end up with a load of piecemeal things that people end up saying haven't been successful, and therefore justify never doing anything on this again. I'm really conscious of everyone's time, and this has been really so inspiring, and I feel I still have like millions of questions. But one thing to say also, like Darragh and I have chatted a couple of times and have kind of pledged to keep in touch with what's going on in Ireland and where we're getting to in England, and from Neff's perspective, like a campaign on better childcare is something that needs to start now, or should have started like last year, but anyway, needs to start now and be something that we're working on with a plan up to the next general election, but also with the ability to be quite responsive as and when as much as you can anticipate anything at the moment, but when those kind of shocks or challenges do come up, whether that's seeing large scale closures or one of the big chains going under, or whether that's significant fee hikes, which is very much possible with so many providers running up big debts at the moment, or whether as we just talked about, that's something like a push to shift the ratios of adults to children within provision. We need to be able to respond to those things as they come along, but also have a long-term campaign which is about getting childcare unavoidably on the agenda of every political party before the next general election, in order that there are some kind of meaningful pledges made and policies enacted that will create the longer term change that we need. So we've said we'll keep in touch with that and keep learning from Ireland. And Darragh's been really generous with his time so far. Yeah, we've got like a few other sessions coming up. Veronica's going to do an evening session, because obviously she has got her hands full during the day, but she's going to do something on the 21st of October in the evening, talking in more detail about the nannies and au pairs that she's been working with, and organising with that group, and some of those demands that are coming through from that group, and some of the very distinct challenges also that they're facing, and how that might help us to think about organising more generally also with childcare workers in group settings. And then Lee Shannon from Salford's going to do a session on Saving the Salford 5, which was a campaign that was successful up in Salford in November. He's going to do that on the 4th of November, but yeah, they managed to save 5 local authority nurseries, initially campaigning against the local authority, but bringing them on board and transitioning that into a more kind of nationally focused campaign. So also unpicking the role of local government in this, when we need to put pressure on them, but when they can become allies, and the extent to which they can be allies in the broader fight for childcare, I think. But thank you so much, Darragh, and I'm sorry we didn't have more faces on the session today, but as we said, there's a lot of people that were really keen also to get the recording of this, so hopefully we'll find an opportunity to build those conversations going forward as well.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure, and yeah, really good conversation, and yeah, it's really, really good to see something coming together, yeah, in the UK as well. Like, it's, I think, yeah, really, really good start to it. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.